In this video, we're going to be taking a look at building a little farmhouse bench. This is a brand new style for us. I've never built this particular design before, but it's something that was specifically requested by our customer. It's going to be a 4-foot bench. We're going to be using two 2x6s for the bench top. So I've already cut those down to 48 inches. And then we're going to need one 2x4. And that will be enough for all the parts for our bench. So what I've done here, I've taken an 8-foot 2x4 and I've cut 2 lengths of 17 inches off. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use our table saw and we're going to go ahead and rip both of these 17-inch pieces, 1.5 and 1.5 inches, and that will get our leg pieces out of those two. And then the rest of the 2x4, we're also going to rip 1.5 inch boards out of, and that will be enough for the rest of our parts of our bench. Now, this bench design will require pocket holes. So it's going to require a few pocket holes. And so I do have to paint this one black. So normally when I'm painting things, I don't worry so much about hiding screws and things like that. I'll just come in, fill the screw holes, and away we go. So normally I wouldn't use pocket holes, but you'll see why I have to use pocket holes for this particular design. Now that said, in the plans for this particular design, I will include alternate instructions that if you don't have a pocket hole jig, you could still create the same bench. We just have to modify a couple of things to be able to do that. So just kind of keep that in mind, that if you don't have a pocket hole in the plans, I will show you an alternate option. I would have used that alternate option because I always try to not use pocket holes. Not that I have anything against pocket holes or anything like that. It's just, to me, the construction process can be a little bit quicker with these various methods that we use to avoid pocket holes. And of course, when you're building things to make money, you want to do it as quickly as possible. So that's why I don't typically use pocket holes. But in this case, I have to because of the way the design is. And the customer didn't really want the alternate version of it, so to speak, that didn't use pocket holes. So with that said, let me go ahead and get all my 2x4s ripped down to 1.5 inches wide, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, so now we have everything ripped into our 1.5 inch widths, and now we're ready to go about cutting the rest of the parts. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to be adding a bevel and a miter to our legs. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to set our miter saw to a 10-degree bevel and a 10-degree miter, and then we're just going to do that on both of our legs. And what this will do is it will splay our legs 10 degrees left to right and 10 degrees front to back. And I know it's difficult to explain. I even get confused when I'm cutting this on the miter saw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut one, show it to you, try to explain it better, so you have a clear understanding. Now the rest of the parts that we're cutting are just going to get a simple 10-degree miter at a certain length. So these are the only ones that are a little bit tricky because we're doing the miter, we're doing a compound miter. Here we're doing a 10-degree bevel and a 10-degree miter. So let me do one, and I'll come back, try to explain a bit more what I'm talking about, and then we'll go ahead and finish off cutting our parts. All right, well, this is where things get a bit tricky. So I just want to show you, I've set my miter saw to 10 degrees here, and then back here, this silly gauge isn't really hardly worth nothing. But again, you can see I've got it roughly set to 10 degrees. It doesn't have to be that critical. Now, here's the thing I want to talk about. When you cut this, so you see we're cutting at an angle. What we want to do is come up here to the very top and cut right at that peak. That's what you want to do. But really, what you have to be mindful of is just that point is where we want the angle to end. So like I say, it's a little bit confusing to explain. It's just easier to do. So let me just do it, and then you'll get a better understanding of what I'm talking about here. All right, so here's what I wanted to point out. I don't know, I think you can see it. So you can see that miter, and then it kind of goes flat, and you can see where I had lined up my board. So in order for that 10 degree to end right there, I had to push this ahead just a little bit, because we want the 10 degree to hit right there. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. Your miter saw might be a little bit different, but that's what we're after, right there at the tip. Okay, so let me go ahead and cut that so it's right, and then we'll move it down and continue on. So now you can see how that 10 degree hits right there at the tip. Now the reason I keep talking and stressing this is because this finished leg, we want it to be 17 inches. Now, what we're gonna do when we get all these cut, we're gonna make sure they're all relatively the same length. But at any rate, if you're off just a little bit, it's not a huge deal. But that's why I kind of want to be careful, is I want this to be a total of 17 inches. Now, here's the thing. Really what we want to do is we want to slide this down, and we want the same exact cut up here that we have down here, okay? But generally that's not the safe way to cut. So the safe way to cut is like this. But now we don't have our angles all the same. And so this can kind of get a little bit confusing how this end should be in relation so we get the same cut. So basically what we're looking at is this is the miter, so we want that facing up. So when we go cut the next one, it's at the same plane as this one. I know that makes no sense. I don't know how to explain it, but what we're doing is we're looking down at this, and we want that miter to be at the same angle as the saw blade, so we get the same cut, so to speak. Now you can see here the slope, the bevel is going to go down, and that's how it's going to go down here as well. It's going to be at that same angle, okay? So let's flip this back around, get it back to, so this is how we cut it originally, okay? To get that, and all we're doing is taking this piece and flipping it end for end, but no, and then we have to rotate it, okay? So it's, like I said, I don't really know how best to explain it, but anyhow, we're gonna cut it, and then we're going to take it over to the table and explain just a bit more on these. Okay, the last little bit on these legs, as best as I can explain it, I do apologize, because honestly, they confuse me just a little bit still too, but they really add a really nice design touch, but it does complicate the build when you're doing 10 degrees one way or the other, but when you're doing a compound, it can be confusing. So at any rate, what I wanted to show here, and what I'm trying to show here, is I've got my leg here, even with my tabletop, but you can see how the leg kind of goes at an angle, okay? So it's gonna go at a 10 degree angle that way. But if I stand it up, it's also going at a 10 degree this way. But the top, if you will, is completely flush, it's flat. So the top of that is actually gonna attach to our boards over there, but you can see how it's, so when you're looking at it, it's 10 degrees tilted in, if you will, but it's also tilted in the same 10 degrees this way. So it's cool, it's just complicates things a little bit. But anyhow, we need 4 identical legs to this, so we're gonna go finish cutting those, cutting the rest of our parts, and then we'll come back. I just wanted to show you, we've got all of our legs cut properly, and so what I do is I just kind of line up the angles and just make sure that they're roughly the same length. You could see, you know, maybe they're off just a touch, but they're roughly the same length. And we're going to clean that up at the very end as far as making sure the bench sits nice and level and doesn't wobble and all those things. But that will get you just a good starting point to know that those are all roughly the same length. Now I'm going to go ahead and cut the rest of my parts out of the remaining 1.5 inch stock, and then we'll come back and we'll talk dimensions and start putting this thing together. I will bring you up to speed on some of the things that we did off camera. So one of the pieces that we need is 45 3/8. That's a long piece. That will be our leg spreader. And we've got a 10-degree miter on both ends. That is not parallel. So this side is going this way, and then this side is going this way. And then we've cut two pieces. We're going to field fit. But what I've done is I've cut them to 18 inches. That's the rough length. And then I put a 45-degree miter on one end. Now the other end should get roughly a 45-degree miter as well. But like I say, the exact fit we're going to do in place rather than use a computer dimension, because getting everything exact is probably not all that likely. So we'll fit those in place when we get to them. Now, this assembly, I've already gone ahead and put this together. So these are our legs. And the main thing that we want to do here is make sure that they're oriented properly. So, you know, I've already got these together. So that leg assembly is going in the right direction. Because what we need to do is we need to mark where our pocket holes go. And we don't want our pocket holes on the outside. We want our pocket holes on the inside. And I made a mistake when I was assembling these. I had marked what I thought was the inside, and then I got to looking down here, and I had one of the legs oriented not properly, and so I marked the wrong side. So you want to make sure before you drill your pocket holes that we're doing it correctly. Okay, so I've got all of my pocket holes drilled on the inside here. I am a little bit nervous because there's not a lot of room to work here, how easily it is going to be to put in those pocket holes, but we'll just have to tackle that when we get to it. I do have a right angle drill driver that I could use. I also have the DeWalt right angle impact attachment that I could use, and I'm sure with either one of those, especially the DeWalt one, because the DeWalt one, the head on the DeWalt one is real tiny. So I'm sure we can get in there with the DeWalt one and get those pocket holes drilled in. But if you've never used one of those right angle attachments for an impact, they are a little tricky to use. Like, you got to get used to it, but it's not a big deal at all. So let's talk a couple more boards and dimensions. So these are 8 3/8, okay? And all we did, so we cut them 8 3/8, and then we put a 10-degree miter on both ends, just like the big piece. This one goes this way, and this one obviously goes that way. And you can see they all line up real nice. Now what we did from the bottom, we measured up 4 inches. And, you know, just be mindful in the plans. I don't know why I don't do this more specifically, but sometimes the plans call for it to be 4 inches to the top of the board, and sometimes it calls for the plans to be 4 inches from the bottom of the board. In this case, it's the bottom. So I made a mistake originally and cut these at 8 7/8, thinking it was to the top of the board. So then I had to cut them down to 8 3/8 because it was actually the bottom of the board. So just be mindful of that we're placing it on the correct side of that 4-inch line. Okay, and then now obviously this piece is going to connect. This long piece here is going to connect dead center here and dead center here. Now what I did, now you could use pocket holes here. It is a tight fit, and you definitely have to use your right angle attachment to do that. But what I did, because I'm painting it, so it doesn't really matter too big a deal. I put in some glue at this joint and drove a 3.5-inch screw, boom, just like that. And that certainly will hold it together, okay? But yes, you could use pocket holes and hide the screw holes. I'm gonna come back in and fill those in, most likely, for this particular project. Sometimes I fill them in, sometimes I don't, especially when I'm painting black. I don't think it's really that necessary when you're painting black because you barely see them, but I don't know. I might go ahead and fill those in. Might not. I'll make that decision when I get to it. So now what we need to do is attach our leg assemblies to our board, our seat boards. But what we need to do before we do that is we're going to take one of these boards, put in some pocket holes, and combine those two boards together with pocket holes, okay? Now you'll see in some of our other videos when we're building benches, we'll use a cleat to hold these two boards together because it's quicker and cheaper than using pocket holes. But in this case, because the legs require pocket holes, I'm going to go ahead and drop in 4 pocket holes here. So I'm going to come in from my edge about 2 inches on either end, and then just kind of space the other 2 in the middle there, and use 4 pocket holes to hold my bench boards together. And then we're going to mount our leg assemblies to those bench boards. Okay, so that's the plan. So let me get those 2 boards put together with some pocket holes, and then I'll show you where we're going to place these leg assemblies. We're making progress here. Let me bring you up to speed a little bit. So what we did is we came in 2 inches. Let me get around this side here. So we came in 2 inches and then also 2 inches. Okay, that's what the computer told us. So we've just put the corner of the legs right there at that 2-inch mark. So we've got a 2.5-inch pocket hole screw, and that's what's holding that to our top. We did the 4 pocket holes here for the top itself, and then we took our 45 3/8 inch piece, and we got one 3.5-inch screw. You can see I found center and then centered that on there. And surprisingly, not really that surprisingly, it's supposed to be that way, but everything fit real nice. You can see the miter here. Basically everything fit just like it was supposed to. So that's good. So now what we're going to do is we're going to place these. Now where they're at on here doesn't really matter, okay? It truly does not. But basically what we're going to do is we want to make sure down here we're at that 45, so that we want to make sure it's laying flat. And then up here on the back side, we're going to scribe it. So back here, we're going to scribe it in place. And you can see, if I just hold that down, see how I cut that at 18? It's just a little long. So we're going to scribe it and then cut it to length. And like I say, exactly where it's at, it's not really that critical. Of course, it's going to fit up underneath here. It's not really that critical. I think we give you, I'll double check the dimensions here, but we do give you a dimension from here to here, where this tip is supposed to be. I want to say it's 18 inches, but I'm going to verify that on the plans before I tell you here in the video. So, but the main thing is we're going to put these in place, get them scribed up, both of them, and then we'll figure out exactly how far, I think it's 18 inches, how far it is from the edge of the bench to place them. And you'll be surprised that how much rigidity these angle braces will add. And of course our leg spreader here adds. Once all the pieces are in place, this will be a very, very sturdy little bench. Okay, so let me get those two cut to size, and then we'll get them in place and we'll go from there. You can see we have our first one in place, and so the dimensions that are critical, we came in 8 5/8, and that's to the back side of this, so you can see that. And then according to the computer, it's saying from this corner over should have been 18 inches to that lead edge, and bingo, it actually worked out absolutely perfectly. So like I said, it's not really critical at all exactly where this ends up. And it's not critical where this goes anyway, but according to the plans, it's 8 5/8 from the edge of the bench to that lead edge there. And because I have the tools, I dropped me in a couple of staples here and a staple just to hold it till I could screw it. So here I have a 2.5-inch screw, and then here I have a 3.5-inch screw. So I always use 3.5 if I can. So at any rate, that's what we want to do, the exact same thing on this side. Now, one other thing I just wanted to point out, when I scribe it, so I just hold it up there, draw a line, right? But you can see that's my scribe line. I just cut it a whisker long. I like them to fit snug. So so it's just a whisker long. I'll measure in 8 5/8 to get my bearings. I will just go ahead and measure over 18 just to see where it lands, just for the fun of it. Do use some glue on both ends. And like I said, if you have a brad nailer or a staple gun, you can drop a couple brads in there to hold it in place till you can screw it in for make it permanent. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this one in place and then we'll move on. Well, there you have it. That is more or less the finished bench. Now, we do have a couple other design elements we're gonna add to this. The customer wants some farmhouse X's put on both ends. So we're gonna do that with some fence pickets. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna rip a fence picket down 1.5 inches wide to add those X's on the sides. So we'll show you how we're gonna do that, but I gotta make some fence picket material. So there is our finished end. And so what I did, that top angle, the computer says it's supposed to be 32. I just cut it at 30. And you could see that it's not quite right. It really probably should have been 32, but that's okay because it's not noticeable. That's why I just went with 30. But go ahead and then scribe this so that becomes flush. And then basically do the same thing on the other side, but we have to mark front and back and on the inside where the crossover is so we can cut these little pieces. You can see that this piece is only from here to here. This piece is solid. And then I just put that little cap on just because I personally kind of like that look, that extra step. So when we paint all that, it just gives a little bit extra detail. And I think it kind of looks farmhousey. And that's the look that we were going for. So there is the end cap. So now I got to just repeat the same process on the other side. And then we'll fill up the holes and we'll be ready for paint. All right, so there's our finished bench. You can see we've got this end all X'd up. Both sides. Now it's just a matter of staining it black. And this one will be complete. I did decide to go ahead and add on these little leveling feet. This will do two things. It will allow this bench to sit up slightly off the pavement. This is going to be used in a paved area right by the door, not even as a bench, but just as a plant stand. So, so anyhow, these leveling feet we'll go ahead and put in here. I'm using an 11/32 drill bit. It's what I found works best for these when we're going into pine. That's the perfect size hole to hold these nice and snug. We have to tap them in with a hammer. So that will allow us, so this is not sitting directly on the pavement and sucking up that water in the leg. And the other thing it does, of course, is it allows us to completely level off the bench perfectly. So I'm going to go ahead and add those. And that will basically be the extent of this video. So I hope you enjoyed watching it. The plans are available in our Facebook store. they're $5. Most of our woodworking plans are just $5. And then we do give you the alternate option if you don't have a pocket hole machine, how to build the same design without pocket holes. Thanks for watching. One thing I wanted just to jump on here quick to maybe talk about a little bit is staging. So when you're taking pictures of your pieces for sale, I always like to stage with other pieces that can be interesting. And also sometimes think about staging in a way where there's something beyond that is just an interesting focal thing, but not at all what you're selling. So for example, in this case, I've got the bench laid out. I've got my little Coca-Cola stool in front with some greenery. And then the other thing that's a focal point are these little shelves I sell. And I sell a lot of them little shelves. And you'll be surprised at the number of the people that will see this listing and either ask about that glider behind or that shelf. And maybe you'll get some inquiries on the little Coca-Cola stool. But that shelf and the glider it definitely will catch people's eye. So kind of be thinking about that. Like I have these really pretty wire chairs that you'll see in a lot of my pictures as well. And I use those really, I mean, I'll sell them, but I also bought them with the intent that they're just interesting to look at, catches people's eyes, might be something to be interested in. And something else, when you're looking at this photo from this angle, think about something that you might hang on the fence that you could sell. Now these little shelves that I build and sell, now these are all made out of fence pickets. Those are made out of fence pickets, so they can be used outdoors. So sometimes I'll have one of those hanging on the fence in the back, displayed with some things, some plants or whatever back there too. So they say, ooh, what's that shelf way in the back behind? Especially if it's something that you also sell, it's another opportunity to sell. And I love the shadows and things that I get, and I always take, when I'm taking pictures for Facebook Marketplace or wherever I'm selling, the website, whatever, I always take the pictures outside because I love the interesting shadows. I love the sun, and you'll see that sun come around in the morning. It'll have a little bit different angle, then the sun will come around, and I'll take even more pictures because all these shadows will eventually go away here in about 3 more hours. Then everything will be in direct sun because the sun will be coming around the corner there. So that's just some tips for you as far as staging goes. And I'm always going to Goodwill and flea markets and things like that just to find some little interesting little knickknacks. Now you do want to take a couple pictures just bare so they can see everything as well. But in this particular case, this customer is using this bench as a plant stand in her front entry. So she might actually like some of these things that I'm going to send her a picture of the finished piece. And she'll say, ooh, that would be interesting on my front porch as well. Especially that little shelf, give you some extra height. And it's just a little inexpensive item that you can put together very quickly. So those are just some marketing tips. Always stage your pieces. Always stage your pieces. And I'll probably come up here and get a picture of this glider. So I'm selling the bench, but I'll get a picture of this glider, and I'll get an angle where they can see that monogram, because that's just another thing that so maybe come up here tall like this, get a good picture, another angle of the bench. We see the detail on the end of our bench here. We see the bench, but we also see our glider, and we can just barely make out that monogram. So, just think of some different angles. I always like to get one down low as well. So I'll come down here, take some pictures like that, some interesting angles. So just keep that in mind. Some selling tips for you there.